Welcome to Hope Stories. What if I told you a single sip of water could change a life forever? Not because of science, not because of magic, but because of something far more mysterious. Imagine a child who has lived in silence for years, unable to call out to the people she loves most. Then, in one ordinary moment, her voice returns, not in a hospital, not with medicine, but in the most unexpected way. Was it fate, coincidence, or a miracle hidden inside the human heart? This is not just a story about healing. It's about sacrifice, the unbearable weight of love, and the question of how far one family should go when the world demands the impossible from a child. The deeper we go, the more you'll see that what began as a small act of kindness grew into a conflict that shook lives, tested faith, and asked the one question none of us are ever ready to face. The late afternoon sun spilled gold across the fountain in Central Park, where children chased pigeons and vendors shouted over the hum of the city. Among the crowd sat Richard Miller, a man who had built skyscrapers with his fortune, yet couldn't build a single bridge to his daughter's silence. Lily, 8 years old, pressed her face into his side, her wide eyes watching the water dance but offering no sound, no word, only the heavy absence that had haunted him since birth. Doctors had tried everything: therapies, surgeries, experimental treatments. Nothing pierced the wall of silence. Richard's money bought expertise, but never hope, and so he carried her everywhere, convinced that silence would swallow her whole. It was then that Emily appeared, barefoot, hair tangled, her dress faded from too many washes. She didn't beg like the others. She carried a cracked plastic bottle of water and a quiet dignity that seemed out of place among the chaos. Her grandmother, Margaret, sat nearby, her wrinkled hands clutching a grocery bag filled with cans. Richard noticed them only because Lily tugged at his sleeve, pointing not at the pigeons, not at the fountain, but at the girl holding the bottle. "She's thirsty," Richard murmured, assuming Lily wanted him to buy her another overpriced drink from a cart. He reached for his wallet, but Lily shook her head violently, then stepped forward and extended her hand toward Emily. Emily blinked, uncertain, then poured water into a flimsy paper cup and offered it. Lily's fingers trembled as she lifted it to her lips. Richard turned away, embarrassed, he a billionaire, letting his daughter drink from a stranger's bottle. But the next sound froze him where he stood. A single word broke free, raw and trembling. "Daddy." Richard's heart slammed against his chest. He spun to see Lily clutching the cup, tears streaming down her cheeks. She said it again, louder this time. "Daddy!" Heads turned, whispers rose, strangers gasped. Richard fell to his knees, sobbing openly, clutching her small frame against him as if she might vanish. The city roared around them, but in that moment the world went silent except for the voice he had prayed to hear every day of her life. Emily stood frozen, the cup still in her hand. Margaret whispered a prayer under her breath, as if recognizing something Richard could not name. When his tears slowed, Richard looked up at the girl who had given his daughter more than any doctor had. Gratitude collided with confusion. Who was she? What had she done? That night, Richard did something no one in his empire would have predicted. He invited Emily and Margaret into his penthouse overlooking Manhattan, not as charity, but as family. It shocked his board, his friends, even his own reflection. Yet in Emily's shy smile, he saw something no money could buy. A power that had unlocked his daughter's voice when science had failed. Months passed and whispers of the miracle spread. Another child came, a girl named Sophia, who hadn't spoken since trauma stole her words. Richard watched as Emily, now living under his roof, simply sat beside her, offered her the same ordinary water, and murmured, "It's safe here." Sophia's lips parted and a word slipped out, small and broken but real. "Mommy." The room collapsed into tears. Laughter, disbelief. Again, no medical explanation, only Emily's presence. What had begun as gratitude became a storm. Reporters demanded answers. Doctors wanted tests. Families lined the streets outside Richard's foundation, clutching photographs of their mute children. Emily was only 10, but the world wanted her to save them all. She gave and gave, smiling through exhaustion, until Richard saw her small shoulders trembling under a weight no child should bear. She hid books of neurology under her pillow, studied late into the night, trying to understand what she herself could not explain. Lily begged her to play, but Emily shook her head, muttering about patience, about responsibility. She was a child becoming something less human, more myth. One night, Richard found her collapsed over medical notes, her lips whispering apologies to children she had not met. He carried her to bed, realizing the truth that clawed at his conscience. The miracle was consuming her. Saving others was breaking Emily. And yet, just as he resolved to protect her, a new twist struck like lightning. A mother arrived at the foundation with her 5-year-old son, Lucas, silent since surgery stole his words. Emily refused to treat him, only played with him, laughing and sharing cookies. At dinner, she poured him a glass of plain tap water, nothing special, nothing sacred. The next morning, Lucas padded into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, and said, "Mommy, can I help with breakfast?" The house went still. Margaret dropped her spoon. Richard nearly collapsed. Emily only smiled, weary but radiant. That night, Richard lay awake, haunted by the question clawing at his soul. Was Emily a miracle worker, or a child cursed to carry a burden that would destroy her? And if love was the true power, why did it demand such sacrifice from someone so young? Would you sacrifice a child's innocence if it meant saving thousands of others? Do you believe miracles are gifts, or chains disguised as blessings? As Emily's gift spreads beyond their walls and the world begins to demand more, one secret threatens to tear the family apart. The greatest miracle may come at the cost of losing her entirely. Richard had always believed he understood sacrifice. He had clawed his way from nothing to the top of New York's skyline, trading time, love, and even sleep for steel and glass. But watching Emily grow paler by the day, her laughter fading, he realized he knew nothing about sacrifice at all. She was only 10, yet she carried the desperation of hundreds of families pressing at their gates, each begging for the impossible. Doctors now hovered around her like scientists around a rare specimen, whispering about neuroplasticity and psychosomatic triggers. They wanted blood tests, brain scans, anything to quantify the unquantifiable. Emily refused them all. "I'm not a lab rat," she said softly one evening, staring out the penthouse window at the city lights. "I just want to help." But the demand was relentless. The Hope and Voice Foundation, created as a sanctuary, was becoming a fortress besieged by expectation. Parents arrived from across the country, some camping outside for days, convinced Emily could restore what medicine had stolen. Richard saw in their eyes the same wild hunger he had once felt, the hunger to hear a child's voice again, and he knew the weight of it was crushing her. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, slipped under the foundation's glass doors one rainy morning. Inside, a photograph of a boy no older than Lily, eyes hollow, with a single sentence scrawled in shaky handwriting. "If Emily cannot help him, no one can." Beneath it, a threat. "We will not leave without her." Richard felt the blood drain from his face as he showed it to Margaret, who clutched her rosary with trembling hands. Emily read it last, her small jaw tightening not in fear but in guilt. "They're desperate," she whispered, "just like you were." That night, Richard confronted her. "Emily, this isn't your responsibility. You're a child." She turned, her eyes dark and steady, too old for her years. "I was a child when Lily spoke for the first time. I was a child when Sophia said, 'Mommy.' Nobody cared then that I was too young. Why now?" He had no answer. He wanted to shout, to forbid, but how do you change someone whose power is love itself? The next day brought the twist Richard had feared most. During a session with a little girl named Grace, Emily swayed mid-sentence and collapsed. The room erupted in screams. Doctors rushed in, monitors beeped, oxygen hissed. Lily clung to Richard's arm, her voice breaking, "Daddy, don't let her die." Hours later, Emily awoke in a hospital bed, her skin translucent, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm fine," she insisted. But her body betrayed her. Hands shaking, pulse weak, exhaustion etched into every bone. Richard stood at her bedside, torn between gratitude and fury. Gratitude that she had given him Lily's voice. Fury that the world wanted more until it consumed her. For the first time, he wondered if the miracle was a curse disguised as a gift. Should he close the foundation? Send Emily away? Hide her from a world that would devour her innocence piece by piece? Yet when he looked into her eyes, he saw no fear, only determination. "Please don't stop me," she said, voice trembling. "If I can give one more child a chance, how can I turn away?" That night, Richard made a decision that would alter everything. He announced to the board that Emily would no longer meet families directly. The foundation would instead train doctors and psychologists in empathy, in love, the true source of the miracle. But the announcement ignited a storm. Parents rioted outside the gates, chanting Emily's name, waving pictures of their voiceless children. The media spun it as betrayal, the billionaire hoarding a miracle, keeping hope locked behind closed doors. Emily watched from the window, her small hands pressed against the glass, tears streaming. "They hate you now," she told Richard, her voice shaking. "And it's my fault." Richard pulled her close, his heart breaking. "No," he whispered, though even he wasn't sure anymore. Somewhere deep down, he feared the truth, that love could heal, yes, but it could also destroy. The following morning, as dawn broke over the city, Emily disappeared. Her bed was empty, the sheets cold. On the desk, a single note. "Don't look for me. They need me more than you do." What would you do if the child you loved more than life itself chose the world over her own safety? As Richard begins a desperate search through the shadows of a city that now worships and hunts his daughter in equal measure, one terrifying question hangs in the air. Has Emily stepped into the role of savior, or has she become a sacrifice no one asked her to make? The city turned into a labyrinth of whispers after Emily vanished. News outlets plastered her face on every screen, branding her the miracle child. Some begged for her safe return, while others condemned Richard for letting her slip away. For him, the silence inside the penthouse was worse than the noise outside. Lily refused to eat, Margaret prayed through the night, and Richard's empire crumbled as he abandoned meetings and projects to search for her. Each call from the police ended the same way: no leads. But then came a shaky video uploaded anonymously to social media. It showed Emily in a crowded church basement somewhere in the Bronx, surrounded by families clutching children who stared at her as if she were their last hope. She was thinner, paler, yet her eyes burned with conviction as she knelt beside a boy and whispered something no microphone caught. The video ended with the child speaking his first word in years, the room exploding in sobs and applause. Within hours, millions had seen it. Richard's chest ached with both pride and terror. Emily was alive, helping, but she was slipping further into the role of savior the world demanded. That night, he drove through the Bronx with 2 bodyguards, searching every church. When he finally found her, she was seated cross-legged on the floor, children pressed close around her, her small hands passing out cups of water as if they were holy chalices. Her voice was calm, steady, almost priest-like. When she saw him, her smile faltered. "Daddy," she said quietly, not as a plea but as a warning. "Don't take me away." He pulled her aside, his hands trembling. "Emily, you're a child. You can't carry this. They're using you." She shook her head, tears brimming but unshed. "No one's using me. I choose this. Every time a child speaks, I feel like a piece of the world is healed. How can I walk away from that?" Her words cut deeper than any blade. She wasn't just giving love, she was feeding on it, addicted to the miracle, even as it drained her life. The twist came when Margaret joined them. Her face was grave, her voice sharp. "Richard, you don't understand. Emily's mother was like this too." Richard froze. "Her mother?" Margaret nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "She had the same gift. She gave herself to strangers, healed them with kindness and touch. But it consumed her. She died before she was 30. Heart worn out from giving too much." Richard staggered back, the church walls pressing in. Emily's fate wasn't random. It was inherited, a curse disguised as a gift. He looked at Emily, trembling at the thought that she was walking the same path toward an early grave. Emily's expression softened. "I know," she whispered, as if she had carried the secret all along. "Grandma told me years ago, but if my mom gave her life to help others, why shouldn't I?" Richard's fury erupted, not at her, but at the cruel universe that demanded so much of a child. "Because I won't bury you, Emily. I won't." His voice cracked, raw and broken. The children nearby stared silently, sensing the weight of something greater than themselves. That night, as rain battered the church windows, Richard faced an impossible choice. Take Emily home by force, locking her away from the world, or let her continue down the same road that had killed her mother. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just fighting the world. He was fighting his daughter's own conviction. And deep inside, a darker thought began to whisper. What if she was right? What if her gift was too powerful to be hidden, even if it destroyed her? If you were Richard, would you protect Emily at any cost, even if it meant denying the world her gift? Or would you let her follow the same doomed path as her mother? As the storm outside raged and Emily slipped back into the crowd of desperate families, Richard knew the next choice he made would decide not only her fate, but the fate of countless children who had never spoken a word. Richard could no longer tell if the storm was outside or within. Days blurred into nights as Emily refused to leave the church, her name now whispered like a prayer in every corner of the city. Families came with trembling hands and photographs, lining up as though salvation could be rationed in paper cups of water. Richard felt like a prisoner in someone else's nightmare, forced to watch his daughter transform into a figure he could neither save nor control. Yet the worst came not from the desperate parents, but from the men in suits who appeared one evening after the crowd dispersed. They weren't reporters or grieving fathers. They carried themselves with the quiet authority of people who expected doors to open before they even knocked. Government officials. One of them, a tall man with eyes like flint, approached Richard privately. "You understand what she represents," he said. "This isn't just about families anymore. Imagine what her gift could mean for veterans, trauma victims, even national security. You have a responsibility, Mr. Miller." Richard felt sick. They weren't asking, they were claiming. Emily was no longer a child in their eyes, but a resource, a phenomenon to be studied, controlled, perhaps even weaponized. When Richard refused, the man leaned closer, his voice low. "If you don't protect her properly, someone else will, and they won't ask permission." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. Margaret's revelation about Emily's mother haunted him, but now there was something worse, the realization that Emily was no longer safe simply because of her gift. The world would not just beg, it would take. He imagined faceless institutions locking her away, draining her until she was nothing but a hollow memory of the child who once smiled shyly in his kitchen. Yet when he tried to warn Emily, she met his fear with defiance. "Daddy, don't you see? Maybe this is why I was born. If I can help people no one else can reach, how can I hide just because it's dangerous?" Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steel. For the first time, Richard saw not just a child, but the echo of her mother's relentless resolve. The conflict ripped him in two. To protect Emily meant betraying the families whose hope rested in her hands. To let her continue meant risking the same fate that claimed her mother, or worse, letting her fall into the grip of people who saw her as an asset instead of a person. His empire, his fortune, even his reputation felt meaningless. The only empire that mattered now was built on the fragile shoulder of a child too young to carry it. Then came the breaking point. During a crowded session, a boy named Daniel, mute since witnessing his father's death, clung to Emily's hand. The church fell silent as his lips moved, forming a word no one expected. "Please." The room erupted with sobs, parents collapsing to their knees, reporters rushing to capture the miracle. But Richard's blood ran cold. "Not mommy, not daddy, please." A cry of need, of desperation, as though the boy's soul had begged her not to leave. Emily fainted immediately after, her small body crumpling against the floor. As Richard scooped her into his arms, cameras flashing, he realized the truth. Every miracle drained her further, each word spoken by another child stolen from her own strength. When she awoke hours later, pale and weak, Richard told her the decision was final. "No more," he said, his voice shaking. "I won't watch you die piece by piece." But Emily only smiled faintly, whispering, "You can't stop me. You didn't stop Mom either." The words stabbed deeper than any accusation. He saw then the future unspooling before him, Emily slipping beyond his reach, claimed not by death alone, but by a destiny she embraced even as it destroyed her. If you were Richard, would you fight against Emily's destiny to save her life? Or let her embrace it even if it meant losing her? As the city outside chanted her name and powerful forces closed in, Richard understood that the real battle was no longer against silence. It was against time and the cost of every word Emily gave away. Richard thought he had reached the limits of fear, but that night proved him wrong. After Daniel's collapse and Emily's fainting, the foundation was thrown into chaos. Protesters gathered outside, demanding access to her, chanting her name like she was some prophet who owed them salvation. But behind the chanting came something darker: threats. Emails flooded in, desperate parents pleading, strangers offering money, others warning that if Richard stood in the way, he would pay dearly. For the first time, Richard realized this wasn't only about Emily's health. It was about control, about power, about people who would rather see her broken than see her free. The breaking point came when Lily, his own daughter, the reason Emily had first been drawn into their lives, looked at him with wide, fearful eyes and whispered, "Daddy, if Emily stops, will I stop too?" The words hit him like a bullet. For Lily, the miracle wasn't just in the past. It was ongoing, fragile, something she feared could be taken back. Richard couldn't answer. What if Lily's voice, so hard-won, was tethered to Emily's gift in ways none of them understood? What if stopping Emily meant silencing his daughter forever? Margaret, steady as ever, tried to soothe him, but even she carried shadows in her eyes. Her mother faced this choice too, she admitted late one evening when the city finally grew quiet. She knew every act of healing cost her something. She knew the world would demand until nothing was left, and she chose to keep giving. Her voice cracked as she added, "I buried my daughter because of that choice. I can't bury my granddaughter too." Richard wanted to agree, to end it all, but his heart was a battlefield. He saw Emily's conviction, the way she glowed when another child's voice broke through silence. It wasn't pride, it was purpose. And yet he also saw the trembling in her hands, the exhaustion behind her eyes. Every miracle was carving pieces away from her. He could no longer ignore the possibility that Emily was not meant to live a long life, that her gift was not a blessing to be balanced, but a fire destined to burn her out before adulthood. The twist came when the officials returned, this time not with requests, but with an ultimatum. They produced legal documents, citing child welfare laws, declaring Richard unfit to protect Emily's best interests. They argued she was being exploited, not by the world, but by him. They threatened to place her under state custody for medical study and ethical supervision. Richard nearly tore the papers in half. But Emily, sitting quietly at the table, shocked them all by speaking first. "If they take me, I'll go willingly," she said softly, "because maybe they're right. Maybe this isn't just my family's choice. Maybe the world has a claim on me too." Richard's heart shattered. He realized in that moment that the conflict wasn't only external, it was within Emily herself. She wasn't just fighting exhaustion or danger. She was wrestling with identity. Was she a child with a right to live freely, to run, to laugh, to grow? Or was she a miracle bound to serve until nothing remained? Her willingness to walk into the arms of those who would dissect her broke him more than any threat could. He looked at her and saw both the little girl who once sat barefoot in Central Park and the figure the world now demanded, a savior in pigtails. And in that moment, he knew the battle was no longer only about saving her body. It was about saving her soul. If you were Emily, would you surrender your freedom to the world's demands, believing your gift was a duty? Or would you fight to keep your childhood even if it meant denying others hope? As the officials waited for her answer, and Richard stood paralyzed between fury and despair, the future of not just one child, but of countless voiceless children hung in the balance, ready to shatter with a single choice. The church was silent when Emily rose from her chair, the legal documents still trembling in Richard's hands. The officials waited with cold patience. The crowd outside pressed closer against the glass, chanting her name like a hymn. She looked at her grandmother, at Lily clutching Richard's arm, and then at her father himself. For a moment she was only a child again, scared, fragile, her small body shaking with exhaustion. Then she drew in a breath, and her voice, though soft, carried the weight of something larger than herself. "No one owns me," she said. "Not the government, not the crowds, not even you, Daddy. This gift isn't something to lock away or to give away. It's mine, and I've decided what to do with it." Richard felt his chest tighten, torn between terror and awe. "Emily, please," he whispered, but she only shook her head gently. "I will help one last time, and then it's over." The room erupted with protests, officials demanding clarification, Margaret weeping openly, Lily crying out, but Emily moved with a calm that silenced them all. She walked to Daniel, the boy who had whispered please, and took his hand again. She gave him a cup of water, lifted his fingers to her cheek, and smiled. "Say what you need," she murmured. His lips quivered, then parted. "Thank you," he said, clear and strong. The church shook with sobs, and Emily swayed. Richard rushed forward, but she raised a hand to stop him. "Don't," she breathed. "This is the end." Her knees buckled, and Richard caught her before she hit the floor. She was still breathing, her eyes fluttering like she was somewhere between sleep and waking. He held her close, rocking her like he had never allowed himself to when she was smaller, tears streaming unchecked. "Stay," he begged. "Stay with me." She smiled faintly, her lips brushing his ear. "I'm not leaving, Daddy. Every word they speak, I'm still here. I'm everywhere." And then, with the softest exhale, she went still. The world fractured in that moment. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed, officials argued, but Richard heard none of it. He only heard the echo of her words, the fragile weight of her body in his arms. Margaret pressed her hands to her face, whispering prayers through broken sobs. Lily, her voice steady but trembling, touched Emily's hair. "She's not gone," she whispered. "She's in me. She's in Daniel. She's in all of them." Days later, thousands gathered in Central Park for Emily's memorial. Strangers who had never met her lit candles, sang hymns, and carried photographs of children who had spoken for the first time because of her. Richard, standing before the crowd, could barely find words. He did not speak of miracles or curses. He spoke of love. "Emily's gift was not water," he said, his voice raw. It was compassion. It was the belief that no one is voiceless if someone is willing to listen. She gave her life for that belief. It's now ours to carry. The Hope and Voice Foundation grew after her passing, but it changed. No longer built around a single child, it became a movement that taught parents, doctors, and communities the same lesson Emily had embodied: patience, presence, unconditional love. Her name became a symbol not of magic, but of humanity. Yet for Richard, the loss was carved too deep. He kept her shoes by the door, her drawings taped to the refrigerator. Some nights, when the city fell quiet, he swore he heard her voice again. Not a ghost, but an echo. A reminder that she had not been lost, but multiplied in every child she had touched. The greatest twist was not her death. It was her immortality. She had feared becoming a sacrifice, but instead she became a seed. Where she fell, hope grew. Richard knew he would carry the grief for the rest of his life, but beneath it lived something else, the certainty that Emily had been right. The world had claimed her, yes, but she had claimed the world first. What did you feel while reading Emily's journey and her final choice? Comment 100 if you love this story. From which country are you watching? Share this video with your friends to spread the message. Thank you for watching Hope Stories.